Every generation, we find new ways to destroy our children. I, I think there's an influence behind it, but yes, we do. Um, I thought I was glad to see, I think what Trump mentioned something in his speech tonight, um, before the House and Congress, about there was somebody in the audience that had like 40 DCFS kids, like state ward kids. I was like so happy to hear that. That's who I worry about in the medical system the most, because you shouldn't really trust the state. Well, depending on the state. I kind of saw how much the state cared, and it's because they don't give them the people they need, and it's yeah, and then they put it's like they deliberately put these kids in. And I'm not saying some in the foster homes, some of the parents just care about getting money, and they get money for each kid. But when it's good, I know good people that have done it though, and they give loving homes and all of that, you know. But I also, as a psych nurse, saw the other side of it, you know. Really, that once they're an adolescent, nobody really wants them, and many times it's like it seemed like the state would go out of their way to put them in another traumatic home. I mean, I literally had a police officer that had retired that was working with DCFS just for like, not because she needed money, just to be of help, really. And she was retired, and she like quit on the spot because she's like, here, like, we, even as a nurse, we're not allowed to see the records, like their past traumas, which as a psych nurse you really should, but they don't allow it. And I guarantee it's because you would see that there's I know there is, because kids have told me, you know, they were being abused at one house, then they put them in another house and they were abused again. So it was nice to see. I see that Melania is involved in that too, I think Trump said. So that's good, because that's a system that those kids are. I always look at those kids as forgotten, that they're the forgotten kids. And then they always would tell me that in the group homes are so bad. I don't know why the group homes have to be so bad. All I can wrap my head around, and there is some good staff, but I would say part of it is they probably don't hire enough staff. But it's at least where I was at, and I wasn't in a group home, but Maryville Academy seemed like they went out of their way, because they had residentials for state wards. I've done many videos about them. It seemed like they would go out of their way to get people with rap sheets. Not everybody, because I knew people that, you know, had worked in the homes, but also worked where I worked at the acute facility. But it just seemed like there was this track record, like what are you doing? And they would never, like, they didn't even let them, like, you had a lot of kids in that system that have drug and alcohol addiction, and yet they just make them go to some classroom to get educated about drugs and alcohol. That's not going to do shit. And then come to find out they're getting drugs from the classroom. So it's like you talk about a system that does everything to set them up to fail. And like, they don't even let them go to AA. It makes no sense. They're the only people, especially with that population that has the addictions and a lot of the adolescents, they should be allowed to go to Alateen or no. Instead, it's like they don't even have the books there for them. You know, like a 12 and 12 or the AA book. I mean, it's just a forgotten population. Hopefully that'll change. But yeah, it actually, you know, speaking of the transgender stuff, it goes back to, as I was looking at these, I'm convinced now that the Greek gods, we were told, or it's been handed down in history, that they were myths. No, this is what these people practiced. These were way more than just a myth. But you would want to pass it on in history that these gods, which they were false gods, they were fallen angels. But you'd want to pass it off as, oh, it's a myth, because then people wouldn't line it up with the Bible, because it so lines up with the Bible. And that's why the Romans, when they, you know, became the new, you know, powerhouse, they took on those Greek gods. They maybe changed some of them, but pretty much kept them the same, maybe changed names here and there. But there were so many of them. And yet they procreated with man. They did. So that's talked about in Genesis. So that went on with the Greek mythology gods. So they weren't a myth, they were real. And they have some names that people would recognize. In fact, I want to correct something because I said Asclepius, who goes back to the symbol we have for medicine. It goes back to him because he was the god of healing and medicine. Well, he was a hybrid, really. Well, he was part fallen angel because Apollo was his father. And Apollo procreated with a mortal woman. Apollo procreated with many women, many. He had like 51, 52 kids. But Apollo was the father of Asclepius. Apollo was a full fallen angel. I'm not even going to refer to them as Greek gods. I'm just going to follow, because that's what they are. They show them with wings and everything. They just tried to push it off as a myth because they didn't want people, because it lines up with the Bible too much. And this Greek god is Hades. That's in the Bible, right? Hades and death. Yeah, so Asclepius, who was the the father or the god of medicine and healing, he upset Hades. Asclepius disrupted the natural order by using his unparalleled healing abilities to resurrect the dead, a power that blurred the line between mortality and divinity. This upset Hades, who saw it as diminishing the number of souls in the underworld, and alarmed Zeus. Zeus was the king at the time, who feared it would destabilize the cosmic balance and lessen humanity's reliance on the gods. To prevent further disruption, Zeus struck Asclepius down with a thunderbolt, ending his life. But also Apollo, Apollo is where Asclepius got his abilities, because Apollo had them. I mean, obviously the fallen angels. I mean, anybody back then, nobody knew about Jesus or anything, so everybody would think, like this one, Hades, he just stayed down in his domain in the underworld. So all of these angels were judged. When God casted them out and threw them down, he was throwing them down to hell below earth. But they, mosey their way on up here and start wrecking a lot of havoc, which God knows, which is why in the end, God has to chain them below. But Apollo, he was a multifaceted god, and he was associated with healing, prophecy, music, and the sun. See, and that's the thing. All of them tied back to a planet. The god of war in Greek mythology is Eris, and he's tied to Mars. So Apollo tied to the sun. He could both bring disease and cure them, symbolizing balance and duality. While he introduced the art of medicine to humanity, his role in healing was broader and less specialized than his son. So that's where his son, Asclepius, got the abilities. But again, his son, all of that knowledge about medicine, and granted, some of it is legit. They know, these fallen angels know how to do it, but that that knowledge came from a fallen angel. And in Greek mythology, they have a Greek god that this is death. So just like it says in the Bible, Hades and death. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, I had posted I know this was the thing you were replying to. And going back to the Greek days, gender transformation was typically symbolic or tied to divine intervention rather than instructions. And then they mentioned Teresis, a mortal, was transformed into a woman by the gods after striking mating snakes and later reverted to a man. And then there's Hermaphroditus. The child of Hermes and Aphrodite merged with a nymph to become both male and female. So it all goes back to that very thing. The fallen angels, which were the Greek gods.